Evening, everyone. Welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. Big news expected in Washington as early as tomorrow after multiple reports this weekend that we will see the first indictment from Special Counsel Robert Mueller's office. This follows revelations last week about Democrats funding the anti-Trump dossier, the lifting of a gag order on an FBI informant whose details of Russian efforts to influence the Clintons over the sale of uranium-1, the announcement of 2 new congressional probes into Hillary Clinton, and renewed calls for Robert Mueller himself to resign. Oh, and for another special prosecutor to be appointed to investigate Clinton-Russia collusion, James Comey, and Robert Mueller himself over his Russia ties when he was running the FBI. Meanwhile, the Democrats and their media allies are saying all of that is a distraction from their favorite topic, which is, of course, Trump-Russia collusion. We'll do our best to get to the bottom of it all in a moment, but first, I want to focus on the one aspect of this that is actually most important for our national security, and it's not getting enough attention. In all the talk around the uranium-1 deal, you keep hearing about a committee that approved the sale. I actually talked about it here a couple of weeks ago when I was explaining why we have to stand up to China. All Chinese companies should be thrown out of America, and we should use CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, to block any further investment by Chinese companies or the Chinese regime in our economy. You know what? This committee, CFIUS, might just as well be called the Committee for Selling Out America. Not only did they approve the uranium deal, they've turned a blind eye to hundreds of deals that undermine America's national security. Years ago, they approved the sale of our ports to Dubai until a public outcry forced the deal to be reversed. More recently, they've presided over a flood of deals that have handed over crucial technology to our enemies. If you think it's a bad idea to sell our uranium to Russia, that's nothing compared to what's going on right now with China. China's declared aim is world domination, economically and militarily. And the way they're planning to do that is through technology. Their weapons will be artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Some experts think China already has a lead in these areas. But unbelievably, we're helping them in deal after deal where American tech firms give China the technology they need to come after us and defeat us. Imagine if during the Cold War, a committee in Washington agreed to hand over our nuclear weapons and missile defense programs to the Soviets. There would be an outcry, but that's what's going on today with CFIUS. Here are the members of that committee. We asked the committee for some basic information that you, the American people, have a right to know. When does the committee meet? Are the proceedings made public? What are the criteria they use for approving deals? But all we got was a bureaucratic stonewall. It's not good enough. We urgently need to bring CFIUS out of the shadows. This committee is the epicenter of globalism in the DC swamp. Instead of acting to protect America, it stands by while our elites sell out America. Let's see what our panel thinks of all of that. Blogger and RedState.com contributor Kira Davis. Also with us, Executive Editor of National Review, Rehan Salam, and Fox News contributor and syndicated radio talk show host Leslie Marshall. Thank you, all of you, for being with us. Kira, I want to start with you. Look, everyone's talking about Russia the whole time. Am I the only one that is actually more concerned about China?
Yeah.
I'm the only one, or you agree with me?
No, I agree that we should be more concerned about China, but I believe you are probably one of the few people that are. I mean, this is not new. What I find fascinating about your discussion of this is that I can remember being a little bit younger than I am now, and the Clintons were, when Bill Clinton was in office, and I can remember people talking about China then, and then people were bringing up all kinds of shady connections between the technology that we were giving China in the 90s and the U.S. government. And we kind of dismissed it as part of the vast right-wing conspiracy. And I have to be honest with you, I sort of let it go over the years too. It isn't only until recently when I'm seeing, yeah, actually some of this stuff is happening. Some of this stuff is true. China's is on course to experience a major demographic deficit in the coming decades with their one-child-only policy, and it's set to decimate their population. technology is where China can be strong, and they do have designs on becoming a world player, and it's why they ride the fence on this North Korea thing.
Yes.
Because that is their trump card, if you will, for lack of a better, so I do think it's great that it's being brought up, and it is an important discussion to have, but it's nearly impossible to have when the mainstream media is just myopically
obsessed with Russia. You know, to be honest, look, we'll talk about Russia. There's a lot of important news about Russia, and we'll cover it. But just before we get to that, Rehan, this committee, CFIUS, to me, it's a really good example of the problems you get when bits of the bureaucracy don't get enough scrutiny, and just things can happen without anyone really paying attention.
So this is a rare and disturbing instance where I disagree with you a bit, Steve. So I think the fundamental thing is you're talking about two different issues. One issue is long-term strategic questions about the health of the American economy and whether or not that we're giving away valuable intellectual property and what have you to the Chinese. That's a legitimate set of questions. When you look at this committee, however, you're right that there's an inherent bias towards approving things. And the reason there's that inherent bias towards approving the sale of our assets is because people want to sell their assets to the highest bidder, right? So they are very narrowly focused on national security. National security understood as, is it military technology and what have you? Now is it infrastructure to some degree? But what you're talking about is a much bigger set of issues about how we ought to be more strategic about protecting the things that make our economy grow over the long term. And I actually agree that we should do that, but it shouldn't be through this particular committee. That needs to be a larger commitment made by people across the political spectrum. And also, we should do something that we did do during the Cold War. During the Cold War, there was a committee of 17 countries that actually managed, that used our leverage to deal with certain enemy nations. Now, China is a frenemy. They're not exactly just an enemy, they're also partly a friend, right? So that means that you have to have a more nuanced approach. And I think that we need to work with other countries, European allies, for example, other allied countries, and then have that leverage and use that leverage to demand that China play by our rules rather than the other way around.
I promise there's a whole, we talked about China the other week. I really disagree that they're other than an enemy, and all this time that we've been saying things like you're saying, it's all gone in the other direction. You know, they don't particularly want to be partners, they want to defeat us. But I want to get, Leslie, your take on the broader questions that have come up last week. We're going to see Mueller coming out with something tomorrow. Lots of people very excited about that on your side of the political fence. I just want to ask you to get into that this way. Let's just give you the Mueller-Trump-Russia collusion. Let's just say that that's valid and appropriate, and we'll see where that goes. Don't you think, because of what we've heard about uranium and about the Clintons being involved in that and about Mueller's role earlier on with the FBI whistleblower and all the rest of it, there's enough there to investigate that at the very minimum there should be an equivalent investigation of the other side of this question?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because when you look at where this comes from, the source is not, this is not Hillary and Bill writing a check to the Russians, okay? So as much as many on the other side of my ideologic rainbow here would like to say that that is not the case. You have a donor of theirs, which by the way used to give $145 million, and that was cut down at this time and later to $4 million to the Clinton Foundation. One, Hillary Clinton, it was said by the assistant in the State Department, was not getting in CFIUS's way on this, and the State Department is one of 9 departments that, right. And I thank you for doing that, because I didn't see just a picture of Hillary up there, so I thank you for that. And this is the other reason. I am not a nuclear non-proliferation expert, but people like Jeff Levin, who is, have said, regarding national security in Russia, you know, first of all, they don't have the license to export uranium outside the United States. And secondly, he said it was like Russia burning money with regard to our national security.
I don't know, Kira, it seems to me that if there isn't something, you know, active done, you're going to see a revolution amongst Trump supporters. You say, you know, what is going on? There's all these suspicions about Clinton, the way they behaved, that haven't been put to rest. Why isn't there an investigation there?
Well, I think I'm really uncomfortable with that word, the revolution, because I think the revolution has happened. Trump was the revolution. That's what's here now. So I think we are going to see more vocal opposition to just a one-sided investigation and curiosity. But I believe I see it happening. It's already happening. It's already there. So I do think that Trump, as crazy as his tweets get, as crazy as his direct communication with the public is, I do think at the end of the day, we will see, both sides being investigated. I truly do, because that's what Trump wants.
I don't think that's certainly not the expectation around DC at the moment. We'll see.
Is it?
Good point.
I think Trump has a way of being heard.
That's certainly true.
Yeah.
That's certainly true.
Yeah.
Thanks for that discussion. You, our audience, were all fired up after last week's discussion on immigration. Well, stay tuned, because we have an explosive Swamp Watch for you tonight, exposing the swampy tricks that big businesses use to import cheap labor and how that hurts American workers. But next, remember the deplorables? Wait until you see the latest sneering comments from the elite about Trump supporters. That's right ahead. The other day, I saw something that just made my jaw drop. Not so much the content of it, but the tone. It was so revealing about what the elites really think of you. It's a clip from Charlie Rose's show on Bloomberg TV, watched, I guess, by a handful of hedge fund managers and just about no one else. But Charlie Rose here is talking to a journalist called Mike Allen, who writes a daily newsletter that is the must-read for everyone in the DC swamp. Take a look.
But you see, what percentage do you think the far right, and I even include white supremacists in that, and nativists, what percentage are they of the Trump constituency?
It's more than we thought.
Oh, really?
And I thought...
More than, hey, 10, 15%, you think?
I'm not going to put a number on it, because I just don't know. But I can tell you that I missed, like the night before the Charlottesville rally, I missed the importance of that.
So, that to me, it's not just the content, it's that sort of chin-stroking quality. What proportion of Trump supporters are the far right? Is it 10%, 15%, or more? Far right. Kira earlier was talking about the revolution having already happened with the election of Donald Trump. Rayhan, it seems to me that it has happened, but the people who the revolution was against still don't really get it.
Well, my big frustration is that these terms are really plastic. For example, I think of myself as a nationalist, but I believe in a unifying nationalism.
Yes.
There are other people who believe
point.
in a divisive nationalism.
Yes.
So how many people are nationalists? Well, gosh, it depends on what exactly you mean by that.
But it is used as a term of abuse.
Absolutely. George W. Bush and John McCain in the last few weeks gave a couple of speeches that were really taking Trump and Trumpism to task. And what I found so frustrating about them is that they completely lacked introspection. George W. Bush gave a speech saying that we need to be engaged in the world. I agree with him, but George W. Bush did not mention the fact that the Iraq debacle is why a lot of people are in open revolt in the Republican Party. He talked about how we need a commitment to free trade. Fair enough. But when George W. Bush was president, he had an opportunity to put in place perfectly legal safeguards that would have actually contained some of that huge import shock from China in those years. Those were all options available to him, and he gave no inkling that he appreciated how he alienated a lot of people and how he basically put his poor brother in a terrible position when he was the one who hoovered up all of the money from GOP donors. But basically, he couldn't say, my brother screwed up. He made some big mistakes, and the people who paid for those mistakes were rank and file Americans. So when you have that disconnect in the GOP, forget about the disconnect. There is an elite, non-elite disconnect in general. But when people can't have that basic introspection, then they wonder, well, why are people in revolt against us? Why do people want to primary us out of office? That's the reason.
I think well said. Totally brilliant. Kira, they're still describing, you had the deplorables was whatever it was. She said, half the Trump support. He's saying, the far right is 15%. They don't get it at all.
No, I feel like I read Twitter, I read a lot of the CNN commentators, and I think, gosh, these people are really working hard to get Trump reelected in 2020. It is this idea. It seemed after the first few days after the shock wore off of Trump's election, a lot of my colleagues on the left were like, you know what, we really need to rethink the way we've been communicating with the public. And I thought, no, that's great. I think everybody's seeing it. And now it's just kind of like they talk about what we would call flyover America, which I think encompasses most of America that doesn't live in about 3 cities for a lot of left-wing status, if you will. aliens from another planet.
Yes, there's a brilliant. I just want to go, Leslie. There was a piece I read the other week. Totally to Kira's point, it was. I think the headline of the piece was literally "On Safari in Trump's America,"
Yeah.
and it was reporting on the kind of the liberal think tanks and others who are literally going physics there. What's going on with these people? What makes them tick? And then they come back and report something that's completely different from what they heard. The Democrats, it seems to me, they said a few things about trying to understand what really happened. And there are Democrats, and we've had them on the show, people like Ro Khanna, who really think that the answer is to pursue that kind of economic populism that Rehan was referencing. But generally speaking, I just think they're still in that mindset of these people, these Trump supporters, are just, to be sneered at and condescended to.
Well, it's funny because if you guys read my Twitter page, you would think the opposite. Okay, the exact opposite. I know, I've seen, I experience, I live daily that the hatred and the fest is going on from both sides. Fortunately, that is the minority on both sides. I am not an elite Republican. I don't have a country club membership, and I don't have 7 digits in my paycheck. The majority of Americans, I think, are really on the same page. I think where the shock comes in is some of the rhetoric, I know especially here in the city that I live in, Los Angeles, that is so multicultural and so varied. And the largest number, I know we're going to talk immigration perhaps later, the largest number of DACA recipients, the largest number of their family members are living in this state, and look at the economy of this state. But back to your point with the elite, there is a concern that we live among people that are saying things not just on Twitter, but are going to rallies and holding up these signs. And there was a concern that the man who said some of these things and started this was elected. Yes, some people still can't get beyond
I'm sorry because we're out of time on this. That's a really important point, and I just want to, that's kind of at the heart of it, because yes, that's true. There are extremists. Always have been in both parties. But what you've got now is people like Charlie Rose saying that those extremists are what, 10, 15, 20%?
Of
That's
Trump
what's
voters.
outrageous.
That's ridiculous.
Sorry, got to stop there. Of course, one of the reasons, as Leslie just mentioned, that the elites demonize Trump supporters as racist is to try and close down discussion about their open borders ideology. And immigration is the subject for tonight's Swamp Watch. We'll show you how big business exploits the system. Don't miss that. But straight after the break, we'll be looking at the technology revolution and whether it's harming our kids. Should they be banned from using smartphones? That's next.